Hey everyone. So what is failure? Sometimes you'll see, sometimes we'll write failure into the program, we'll put an F or to failure. Sometimes you might read something on a website or magazine and it says, perform to failure. So two things that you have to understand in order to understand what failure means. First of all, there are multi-joint exercises and there are single joint exercises. So an example of multi-joint exercise, definition of multi-joint exercise is basically just more than one joint is working, right? So if we say a squat, okay? So a squat's an example of multi-joint exercise. Well, my hips are working, my knees are working, my ankles are moving, right? Those are multi-joints. An example of a single joint exercise would be a bicep curl, where just my elbow is moving, right? A dumbbell bench press or a row would be a multi-joint because my shoulder and my elbow are moving. A bicep curl would be a single joint because just my elbow is moving. Or you could do like a tricep extension, right? That would be a single joint. So generally speaking, going to failure on multi-joint movements, we don't like, right? So bench press, multi-joint movement. We don't really want you to go to failure on that, right? Back squat, multi-joint movement. We don't really want you to go to failure. The main reason why we don't want you to go to failure on multi-joint movements is because there's an inherent, it just increases your potential for an injury, essentially. So that's the first thing you have to understand about failures. You have multi-joints and you have single joint movements, right? The next thing you have to understand is that there are two functions of the muscle, or two actions of the muscle. There is a shortening or a contracting, right? And then there's a lengthening or relaxing, okay? It's better to think about this as lengthening versus relaxing because your muscle's not really relaxing. It's still under tension. It's a different tension, right? So failure specifically means, like we're gonna use a bicep curl because it's a really easy exercise to use. Plus it's a single joint, and remember, you're only really gonna go to failure on single joints. So if we say, okay, I want you to go to failure on your gun show, right? So I want you to do you're gonna do a curl in the hand up position, the palm down position, and the neutral grip position. In each one of those positions, I want you to go to failure. So what does that mean? That means we're specifically talking about failure in the contraction phase, right? We're not talking about failure in the lengthen phase of the bicep curl. We're talking about failure in the concentric or the contraction phase. So basically failure is where you cannot perform another voluntary muscle contraction, right? Failure in the bicep curl would be I cannot perform any more bicep curls unless I do something to cheat or do something to shorten the range of motion, whatever, right? But if I'm staying in a nice, good technique form, everything's on point, and I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna do banded curls until I can't do anymore, then it would be, that's it. That would be your failure, right? So as long as you're doing failure on single joint movements and not multi-joint movements, and as long as you're not taking that every single day where you're trying to go to failure, then typically going to failure once a week for 1 or 2 sets is totally fine, and that's usually what we actually like to see during the finishers. So a lot of times in the finisher, we're gonna ask you to go to failure. Just remember, let's say it's a lunge finisher, right? So we're asking you to do these different lunges. We don't actually want you to get to the point where you go to do a lunge and you can't push up anymore. No, that's a multi-joint movement. Remember, you're not gonna do that. Think a little bit about safety, okay? You can do a hip up to failure. What's the worst thing that's gonna happen if you do a hip up to failure? I mean, your butt's gonna be really sore for a couple days, that's about it. If you do a squat to failure, what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? Your form's gonna break down, you fall over with the weight, all sorts of crazy things can happen. All right guys, there you go. There's the video on failure.